Welcome back. I like to read. I like to go to my bed. I'm freezing. It's freezing cold outside. But the sun is shining, but I'm freezing. So I like to go to my bed and read below my blankets. Yes, I need a minute to get to my bed.
Boeing 707. The Boeing 707 is an early American long-range narrow-body airliner, the first jetliner developed and produced by Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Developed from the Boeing 367-80 prototype first flown in 1954, the initial 707-120 first flew on the 20th of December, 1957. Pan Am began regular 707 service on the 26th of October, 1958. With versions produced until 1979, the 707 was a swept-wing quadjet with pod engines. Its larger fuselage cross-section allowed 6 abreast economy seating, retained in the later 720, 727, 737, and 757 models. Although it was not the first commercial jetliner in service, the 707 was the first to be widespread, and is often credited with beginning the jet age. It dominated passenger air transport in the 1960s, and remained common through the 1970s, on domestic, transcontinental, and transatlantic flights, as well as cargo and military applications. It established Boeing as a dominant airliner manufacturer with its 7X7 series. The initial, 145-foot-long, 44M, 707-120 was powered by Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojet engines. The shortened, long-range 707-138 and the more powerful 707-220 entered service in 1959. The longer-range, heavier 707-300/400 series has larger wings and is stretched slightly by 8 feet, 2.4 m. Powered by Pratt & Whitney JT4 turbojets, the 707-320 entered service in 1959, and the 707-420 with Rolls-Royce Conway turbofans in 1960. The 720, a lighter short-range variant, was also introduced in 1960. Powered by Pratt & Whitney JT3D turbofans, the 707-120B debuted in 1961 and the 707-320B in 1962. The 707-120B typically flew 137 passengers in 2 classes over 3,600 nautical miles, mi, 6,700 kilometers, 4,100 mi, and could accommodate 174 in one class. With 141 passengers in 2 classes, the 707-320 forward/420 could fly 3,715 mi, 6,940 kilometers, 4,320 mi, and the 707-320B up to 5,000 mi, 9,300 kilometers, 5,800 mi. The 707-320C convertible passenger freighter model entered service in 1963, and passenger 707s have been converted to freighter configurations. Military derivatives include the E-3 Sentry airborne reconnaissance aircraft and the C-137 Stratolina VIP transport. In total, 865 Boeing 707s were produced and delivered, not including 154 Boeing 720s. Development, edit. Model 367-80 Origins, edit. Main article, Boeing 367-80. During and after World War II, Boeing was known for its military aircraft. The company had produced innovative and important bombers, from the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-29 Super Fortress to the jet-powered B-47 Stratojet and B-52 Stratofortress, but its commercial aircraft were not as successful as those from Douglas Aircraft and other competitors. As Douglas and Lockheed dominated the post-war air transport boom, the demand for Boeing's offering, the 377 Stratocruiser, quickly faded with only 56 examples sold and no new orders as the 1940s drew to a close. That venture had netted the company a $15 million loss. During 1949 and 1950, Boeing embarked on studies for a new jet transport and saw advantages with a design aimed at both military and civilian markets. Aerial refueling was becoming a standard technique for military aircraft, with over 800 KC-97 Stratofreighters on order. The KC-97 was not ideally suited for operations with the USAF's new fleets of jet-powered fighters and bombers. This was where Boeing's new design would win military orders. As the first of a new generation of American passenger jets, Boeing wanted the aircraft's model number to emphasize the difference from its previous propeller-driven aircraft, which bore 300 series numbers. The 400, 500, and 600 series were already used by their missiles and other products, so Boeing decided that the jets would bear 700 series numbers, and the first would be the 707. The marketing personnel at Boeing chose 707 because they thought it was more appealing than 700. The project was enabled by the Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojet engine, the civilian version of the J57 that yielded much more power than the previous generation of jet engines and was proving itself with the B-52. Freed from the design constraints imposed by limitations of late 1940s jet engines, developing a robust, safe, and high-capacity jet aircraft was within reach for Boeing. Boeing studied numerous wing and engine layouts for its new transport forward/tanker, some of which were based on the B-47 and C-97, before settling on the 367-80-80 Quadjet prototype aircraft. Less than 2 years elapsed from project launch in 1952 to roll out on the 14th of May 1954, with the first -80 flying on the 15th of July 1954. The prototype was a proof of concept aircraft for both military and civilian use. The United States Air Force was the first customer, using it as the basis for the KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling and cargo aircraft. Whether the passenger 707 would be profitable was far from certain. At the time, nearly all of Boeing's revenue came from military contracts. In a demonstration flight over Lake Washington outside Seattle, on the 7th of August, 1955, test pilot Tex Johnston performed a barrel roll in the 367-80 prototype. Although he justified his unauthorized action to Bill Allen, then president of Boeing, as selling the airplane with a 1G maneuver, he was told not to do it again. The 132 in 3,400 mm, wide fuselage of the Dash 80 was large enough for 4 abreast, 2+2, seating like the Stratocruiser. Answering customers' demands and under Douglas competition, Boeing soon realized this would not provide a viable payload, so it widened the fuselage to 144 in, 3,660 mm, to allow 5 abreast seating and use of the KC-135S tooling. Douglas Aircraft had launched its DC-8 with a fuselage width of 147 in, 3,730 mm. The airlines liked the extra space and 6 abreast seating, so Boeing increased the 707's width again to compete, this time to 148 in, 3,760 mm. Production and testing, edit. The first flight of the first production 707-120 took place on the 20th of December, 1957, and FAA certification followed on the 18th of September, 1958. Both test pilots Joseph John Tim TYMCZYSZYN and James R. Gannett were awarded the first Ivan C. Kinchelow Award for the test flights that led to certification. A number of changes were incorporated into the production models from the prototype. A Kruger flap was installed along the leading edge between the inner and outer engines on early 707-120 and -320 models. This was in response to de Havilland Comet overrun accidents which occurred after over-rotating on takeoff. Wing stall would also occur on the 707 with over-rotation, so the leading edge flaps were added to prevent stalling even with the tail dragging on the runway. Further developments, edit. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources in this section. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. December 2016. Learn how and when to remove this template message. The initial standard model was the 707-120 with JT3C turbojet engines. Qantas ordered a shorter-bodied version called the 707-138, which was a -120 with 6 fuselage frames removed, 3 in front of the wings, and 3 aft. The frames in the 707 were set 20 in, 510 mm, apart, so this resulted in a shortening of 10 feet, 3.0 m, to a length of 134 feet 6 in, 41.0 m. With the maximum takeoff weight the same as that of the -120, 247,000 pound, 112 t, the -138 was able to fly the longer routes that Qantas needed. Braniff International Airways ordered the higher thrust version with Pratt & Whitney JT4 engines, the 707-220. The final major derivative was the 707-320, which featured an extended span wing and JT4 engines, while the 707-420 was the same as the -320, but with Conway turbofan engines. Though initially fitted with turbojet engines, the dominant engine for the Boeing 707 family was the Pratt & Whitney JT3D, a turbofan variant of the JT3C with lower fuel consumption and higher thrust. JT3D engine 707S and 720S were denoted with a B suffix. While many 707-120BS and -720BS were conversions of existing JT3C powered machines, 707-320BS were available only as newly built aircraft, as they had a stronger structure to support a maximum takeoff weight increased by 19,000 pound, 8,600 kilograms, along with modifications to the wing. The 707-320B series enabled non-stop westbound flights from Europe to the west coast of the United States and from the US to Japan. The final 707 variant was the 707-320C, C4 convertible, which had a large fuselage door for cargo. It had a revised wing with 3-sectioned leading-edge flaps, improving takeoff and landing performance and allowing the ventral fin to be removed, although the taller fin was retained. The 707-320BS built after 1963 used the same wing as the -320C and were known as 707-320B advanced aircraft. In total, 1,010 707s were built for civilian use between 1958 and 1978, though many of these found their way to military service. The 707 production line remained open for purpose-built military variants until 1991, with the last new-build 707 airframes built as E3 and E6 aircraft. Traces of the 707 are still found in the 737, which uses a modified version of the 707's fuselage, as well as the same external nose and cockpit configurations as those of the 707. These were also used on the previous 727, while the 757 also used the 707 fuselage cross-section. Design, edit. Wings, edit. The 707's wings are swept back at 35 degrees, and like all swept-wing aircraft, display an undesirable Dutch roll flying characteristic that manifests itself as an alternating combined yawing and rolling motion. Boeing already had considerable experience with this on the B-47 and B-52, and had developed the yaw damper system on the B-47 that would be applied to later swept-wing configurations like the 707. However, many pilots new to the 707 had no experience with this instability, as they were mostly accustomed to flying straight-wing propeller-driven aircraft such as the Douglas DC-7 and Lockheed Constellation. On one customer acceptance flight, where the yaw damper was turned off to familiarize the new pilots with flying techniques, a trainee pilot's actions violently exacerbated the Dutch roll motion and caused 3 of the 4 engines to be torn from the wings. The plane, a brand new 707-227, N7071, destined for Braniff, crash-landed on a riverbed north of Seattle at Arlington, Washington, killing 4 of the 8 occupants. In his autobiography, test pilot Tex Johnston describes a Dutch roll incident he experienced as a passenger on an early commercial 707 flight. As the aircraft's movements did not cease and most of the passengers became ill, he suspected a misrigging of the directional autopilot, yaw damper. He went to the cockpit and found the crew unable to understand and resolve the situation. He introduced himself and relieved the ashen-faced captain, who immediately left the cockpit feeling ill. Johnston disconnected the faulty autopilot and manually stabilized the plane with 2 slight control movements. Tex Johnston recommended Boeing increase the height of the tail fin, add a boosted rudder, as well as add a ventral fin. These modifications were aimed at mitigating Dutch roll by providing more directional stability in yaw. Engines, edit. 1. An early JT4 turbojet. 2. A later JT3D low bypass turbofan. The initial 145-foot-long, 44 m. 707-120 was powered by Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojet engines. The JT3D3B engines are readily identifiable by the large grey secondary air inlet doors in the nose cowl. These doors are fully open, sucked in at the rear, during takeoff to provide additional air. The doors automatically close with increasing airspeed. The 707 was the first commercial jet aircraft to be fitted with clamshell-type thrust reversers. Turbo compressors, edit. The 707 uses engine-driven turbo compressors to supply compressed air for cabin pressurization. On many commercial 707s, the outer port, number 1, engine mount is distinctly different from the other three, as this engine is not fitted with a turbo compressor. Later model 707s typically had this configuration, although American Airlines had turbo compressors on engines 2 and 3 only. Early 707 models often had turbo compressor fairings on all 4 engines, but with only 2 or 3 compressors installed. Upgraded engines, edit. Pratt & Whitney, in a joint venture with 7Q7, SQS, and Omega Air, selected the JT8D219 low-bypass turbofan as a replacement power plant for Boeing 707-based aircraft, calling their modified configuration a 707RE. Northrop Grumman selected the -219 to re-engine the U.S. Air Force's fleet of 19 E-8 Joint Stars aircraft, which would allow the J-Stars more time on station due to the engine's greater fuel efficiency. NATO also planned to re-engine their fleet of E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft. The -219 is publicized as being half the cost of the competing power plant, the CFM International CFM56, and is 40 dB quieter than the original JT3D engines. Operational history, edit. The first commercial orders for the 707 came on the 13th of October, 1955, when leading global carrier Pan Am committed to 20 Boeing 707s, and 25 Douglas DC-8s, dramatically increasing their passenger capacity, in available revenue passenger seat miles per hour /per day, over its existing fleet of propeller aircraft. The competition between the 707 and DC-8 was fierce. Pan Am ordered these planes when and as they did so that they would be the operators of the first off-production line for each aircraft type. Once the initial batch of the aircraft had been delivered to them and put into operation, Pan Am would have the distinction of being not only the launch customer for both transcontinental American jets, but the exclusive operator of American intercontinental jet transports for at least a year. The only rival in intercontinental jet aircraft production at the time was the British de Havilland Comet. However, the Comet series had been the subject of fatal accidents, due to design flaws, early in its introduction and withdrawn from service. Virtually redesigned from scratch, it was still smaller and slower than the 707 when reintroduced as version -4. In addition, airlines and their passengers at the time preferred the more established Douglas aircraft as a maker of passenger aircraft, and several major carriers committed only to the Douglas DC-8, delayed by Douglas' decision to wait for the larger and more fuel-efficient Pratt & Whitney JT4 turbojet to design a larger and longer-range aircraft around. Anticipating this advantage, Boeing made a late and costly decision to redesign and enlarge the initial 707S wing to help increase range and payload, giving birth to the 707-320. Pan Am inaugurated 707 service with a christening at National Airport on the 17th of October, 1958, attended by President Eisenhower, followed by a transatlantic flight for VIPs, personal guests of Founder One trip, from Baltimore's Friendship International Airport to Paris. The aircraft's first commercial flight was from Idlewild Airport, New York, to Le Bourget, Paris, on the 26th of October, 1958, with a fuel stop in Gander, Newfoundland. In December, National Airlines operated the first U.S. domestic jet airline flights between New York /Idlewild and Miami, using 707s leased from Pan Am. In February 1956, rival global giant Trans World Airlines then President Howard Hughes ordered 8 new Boeing 707-120, dubbing the new jet service Starstream, launching its first jet service between New York Idlewild International Airport and San Francisco International Airport on the 25th of January 1959. American Airlines was the first domestic airline to fly its own jets on the 25th of January 1959. TWA started domestic 707-131 flights in March and Continental Airlines started 707-124 flights in June. Airlines that had ordered only the DC-8, such as United, Delta, and Eastern, were left without jets until September and lost market share on transcontinental flights. Qantas was the first non-US airline to use the 707S, starting in 1959. The 707 quickly became the most popular jetliner of its time. Its success led to rapid developments in airport terminals, runways, airline catering, baggage handling, reservation systems, and other air transport infrastructure. The advent of the 707 also led to the upgrading of air traffic control systems to prevent interference with military jet operations. As the 1960s drew to a close, the exponential growth in air travel led to the 707 being a victim of its own success. The 707 had become too small to handle the increased numbers of passengers on the routes for which it had been designed. Stretching the fuselage again was not a viable option because the installation of larger, more powerful engines would need a larger undercarriage, which was not feasible given the design's limited ground clearance at takeoff. Boeing's answer to the problem was the first wide-body airliner, the Boeing 747. The 707's first-generation engine technology was also rapidly becoming obsolete in the areas of noise and fuel economy, especially after the 1973 oil crisis. Operations of the 707 were threatened by the enactment of international noise regulations in 1985. Shannon Engineering of Seattle developed a hush kit with funding from Tracer, Inc., of Austin, Texas. By the late 1980s, 172 Boeing 707s had been equipped with the Quiet 707 package. Boeing acknowledged that more 707s were in service than before the hush kit was available. Trans World Airlines flew the last scheduled 707 flight for passengers by a U.S. carrier on the 30th of October, 1983, although 707s remained in scheduled service by airlines from other nations for much longer. Middle East Airlines of Lebanon flew 707s and 720s in frontline passenger service until the end of the 1990s. Since Lade of Argentina removed its 707-320BS from regular service in 2007, Sahar Airlines of Iran was the last commercial operator of the Boeing 707. After suspending its scheduled passenger service in April 2013, Sahar continued to operate a small fleet of 707s on behalf of the Iranian Air Force. As of 2019, only a handful of 707s remain in operation, acting as military aircraft for aerial refueling, transport, and AWACS missions. Variants, edit. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources in this section. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. December 2016. Learn how and when to remove this template message. Although certified as Series 100S, 200S, 300S, etc., The different 707 variants are more commonly known as Series 120S, 220S, 320S, and so on, where the 20 part of the designation is Boeing's customer number for its development aircraft. 707-020, edit. Main article, Boeing 720. Announced in July 1957 as a derivative for shorter flights from shorter runways, the 707-020 first flew on the 23rd of November 1959. Its type certificate was issued on the 3rd